Some people walk into a room and immediately command respect. They don't raise their voice. They don't chase attention. They don't try to dominate the space. Still, something about them makes others pause. It isn't arrogance. It isn't fear. It's a quiet kind of strength that feels solid and earned. You can sense it in the way they carry themselves. Calm, measured, unshaken by small frustrations or petty conflicts. They don't have to prove who they are, because their presence does it for them. In the Middle Ages, knights were expected to carry this kind of presence, not just on the battlefield, but in daily life. They weren't admired simply because they had armor or a title. They were admired because of how they lived, because of the code they followed, because their strength was matched by self-control, and their power by restraint. This was the essence of chivalry. Not just a list of polite gestures, but a way of being, a discipline, a commitment to integrity that could be seen in small actions, not just grand ones. Today, the word chivalry can sound outdated or theatrical. Some people think of it as old-fashioned romance. Others dismiss it as a performance. But originally, chivalry wasn't about showmanship. It was about character. It was about how you acted when no one was watching. It was about whether your values could be felt before they were ever spoken. In a world that rewards noise, that kind of quiet integrity stands out. This video is about how to build that kind of presence, how to live in a way that earns respect without ever needing to ask for it, how to follow a modern version of the Knight's Code and let your actions speak on your behalf. Not to impress others, but to become the kind of person who doesn't need to. Chivalry is one of those words that carries a lot of weight, but also a lot of confusion. To some, it sounds noble. To others, outdated. We might associate it with courtly love, or polite manners, or vague ideas of medieval honor. But the truth is more complex. Historically, chivalry was never a single fixed code. It evolved over centuries, and different regions emphasized different values. Some versions were deeply tied to religious institutions. Others were more focused on military conduct or noble lineage. There was no universal rulebook, no single oath recited by all knights across Europe. What did exist, though, was a shared ideal, that strength should be matched by restraint, and that power should serve a purpose greater than self-interest. This wasn't just about how knights fought, it was about how they lived, how they carried themselves, what they stood for when no one was watching. For the purpose of this video, we're not going to try to cover every version of the chivalric code. Instead, we're going to focus on 4 core principles that appear again and again across time and tradition. Principles that still carry weight today. 1. Defend the weak. Strength wasn't seen as something to be hoarded or displayed. It was meant to be used in service of others. Knights were expected to stand up for those who couldn't stand for themselves, even when it came at a cost. Protection, not domination, was the ideal. 2. Be loyal and disciplined. A knight's word was supposed to mean something. Loyalty meant being dependable, not just in battle, but in daily life. Discipline was the foundation, keeping yourself in check, training consistently, acting with purpose rather than impulse. 3. Live with honor and speak the truth. Honor wasn't just about reputation, it was about inner alignment. You told the truth, even when it was difficult. You didn't pretend to be something you weren't. People trusted you not because of what you said, but because of what they saw you consistently do. 4th, practice courtesy and restraint. Courtesy didn't mean softness, it meant control. It meant treating others with dignity, even when you disagreed. It meant not letting your temper or your ego run the show. A knight who couldn't govern himself wasn't seen as strong. He was seen as a liability. These values weren't always perfectly followed. Knights were human, with all the contradictions that come with that. But these ideals were held up as the standard. The goal wasn't perfection, it was direction. And when we talk about the chivalry trick, about being admired without needing to speak, this is where it begins. in the quiet daily practice of embodying values that speak for themselves. So why does this kind of presence, the grounded, disciplined kind, draw so much respect? It's not just tradition or symbolism. There are psychological reasons we admire people who live by a clear set of principles, especially when those principles are expressed without self-promotion. One of the key elements is internal congruence. That's when someone's behavior aligns with their values. They don't need to tell you what matters to them because it shows up in how they live. That kind of alignment builds trust. We're drawn to people who feel stable and centered because they aren't constantly shifting to please others or to control how they're seen. Another factor is nonverbal dominance, which has nothing to do with aggression. It refers to the calm confidence that comes from emotional regulation. When someone stays composed under pressure, when they don't flinch at conflict or overreact to stress, it signals strength. People notice. That steadiness creates a kind of social gravity. Others instinctively pay attention. This links closely to what's known as low reactivity. In psychology, low reactivity refers to a person's ability to pause, reflect, and choose their response instead of being pulled by immediate emotion. It's not suppression, it's control. And in leadership, in conflict, and even in daily life, low reactivity often looks like wisdom. Finally, there's costly signaling theory. This is the idea that some behaviors earn respect precisely because they are difficult to fake. When a person could speak, boast, or defend themselves but chooses not to, it suggests they don't need validation. That kind of restraint signals confidence at a deeper level. Silence becomes meaningful because it shows what the person values more than attention. Put simply, people admire those who are grounded, who can hold their center when others are losing theirs, who choose their actions carefully, not because they are afraid to speak, but because they know when silence carries more weight. These psychological traits aren't new discoveries. They're the modern language for describing what chivalric culture tried to cultivate all along. Quiet strength, disciplined character, presence with purpose. It's not about being distant or passive. It's about earning respect from the inside out. The traits that once defined knights such as discipline, restraint, and quiet strength aren't relics of the past. They describe something timeless. And while the world looks very different today, the need for that kind of presence hasn't gone away. If anything, it has become more rare and more valuable. You don't need armor, a title, or a battlefield to live by a code. The core ideals of chivalry still hold power, especially in a world that often rewards noise over depth. What once shaped a knight's reputation can now shape your character. Modern life rewards visibility. The loudest voice often gets the most attention. Social media encourages us to present ourselves as admirable rather than to become someone who genuinely is. But the most respected people usually aren't the ones chasing admiration. They're the ones who live in quiet alignment with values that speak for themselves. Here are 4 modern interpretations of the chivalric code. Not rules, but practices. You won't follow them perfectly, and that's not the point. The goal is consistency, not performance. 1. Protect, don't perform. Look for ways to use your strength in service of others. This doesn't have to mean dramatic sacrifices. It can be small but real acts of protection. Stepping in when someone is being mistreated. Offering support without seeking recognition. Holding space for others to speak, especially when they're being ignored. The point is to act with purpose, not for praise. 2. Be loyal in the shadows. Discipline is what you do when no one is watching. Keep your promises, especially the quiet ones. Show up on time, follow through. Don't speak ill of others behind their back. Loyalty isn't just about relationships. It's about becoming someone others can rely on. Not because you say you're dependable, but because experience has shown that you are. 3. Live in alignment with truth. You don't have to say everything you think, but when you do speak, let it be honest. Don't exaggerate your story. Don't twist your values to win approval. People can tell when someone is editing themselves to be liked. It doesn't inspire trust. Living in truth means choosing what aligns with your values, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. 4. Let courtesy be your armor. Courtesy is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it's a form of restraint. When you stay composed in a tense moment, when you respond with respect instead of aggression, you're showing control. That doesn't mean allowing disrespect. It means responding in a way that reflects who you are, not who someone else is trying to provoke you into becoming. Courtesy is how you show strength without creating fear. These aren't strategies for looking admirable. They're ways of becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to seek admiration at all. Over time, the results speak for themselves. People may not always notice your quiet choices in the moment, but they remember how you made them feel. They remember who stayed steady, who followed through, who acted with intention when others were simply reacting. That's the essence of the chivalry trick. Live the kind of life that builds respect without asking for it. You can't fake this. You can adopt the posture. You can memorize the code. You can act with discipline and restraint for a while. But if your goal is to be admired rather than to become admirable, people will feel the difference. Chivalry wasn't designed to be a performance. It was a personal standard, a way to shape your inner world so that your outer actions naturally followed. The knights who lived by it weren't perfect. They failed often. But they kept returning to the same question. Am I living in line with what I claim to believe? That's what matters most. Not whether others recognize your effort, but whether your effort is rooted in something real, something you would still practice even if no one ever praised you for it. Because when your values are internal, when they are chosen, not borrowed, and lived, not advertised, they begin to shape your presence in ways you don't have to control. People notice. They may not always say it, but they feel it. The quiet strength, the earned calm, the sense that you are not trying to impress anyone, only trying to live with clarity. That's what earns respect. Not the image, but the consistency. Not the strategy, but the substance. In that way, the chivalry trick isn't a trick at all. It's a commitment, a decision to hold yourself to a standard that most people won't see right away. So if you want to be admired without saying a word, start by asking yourself who you are when there's no one around to watch. Who you are when admiration isn't on the table. Because respect isn't something you demand. It's something you attract by becoming someone who doesn't need it. And that's when people start to notice.